over the past few years, the Library Foundation has really had to reinvent itself, okay? 2018, the millage failed, and that cost the libraries $3 million a year. Okay, then in 2019, there was a referendum, and $10 million were removed from the reserves that were there to expand the library system. Okay, COVID hit, the foundation was disrupted, we couldn't have meetings. And then last year, 2021, the Friends, you need to understand this, the Board of Control controls the library. That's political appointees. Supporting the library are really three groups, but we'll just focus on two. The Friends of the Library, who were the original ones, and they helped found us, the foundation, okay? And we had to step up in 2021 to make sure that millage passed, because if it didn't pass, we really were in trouble. And a friend of mine, a good friend, said, look, people say if the budget gets cut, libraries are going to close. He said, close them. They never close them. Well, they did. Every library is now closed on Sunday, and if you add that up, that's the closure of one library. We lost a library already. So we stepped into the void. We worked very hard, spent a fair amount of money, did a whole lot of things to make sure that millage passed. And because of those insights that we protected several $1 million a year, that was one of the most important things we could do. And so for 30 years, this is our 30th anniversary this year, for 30 years, the foundation raised money for the library. And that is now our number 3 priority. Number 1 is to raise awareness, and number 2 is to raise support for the library. And that's what this talk is about. All right, for all of you who are looking at this, did any of you recognize this? You probably studied it at some point in school. This is the Narmer Palace. It's famous. I think it's in the Louvre Museum. Narmer was the first Egyptian pharaoh in 3100 BC. Okay? There he is about to bash somebody's head in. We've just been talking about the conquerors. And you notice the guy's unarmed. The guy has no weapon. He's about to bash his head in. If we took Narmer and put him in the Middle Ages of about 1000 AD, he would see almost nothing that impressed him. People were still working wood and stone and metal in pretty much the same way as they had been 4,000 years before. If we were to jump in forward to 1776, very important year to us, put him in Paris or London, he would see many things that were impressing with their luxury, but very little technology that would impress him. You open up a clock, he could look at it and go, oh, okay, I understand what this is doing. I can only think of 3 things that would totally baffle him. Gunpowder, the magnetic compass, and the telescope and other lenses. If you can think of any other, let me know. I've been working this for years, so those are only 3 I can come up with. Now, in contrast to that, let's start 1776 with one of the founders of this country and the founder of our libraries. And let's bring him to the present day. Show him hot and cold running water in the bathroom. Show him a thermostat where you can change the temperature in the room by doing a dial. You can tell how old I am. They don't have dials anymore. You can't figure them out. Show him aluminum. In his day, aluminum was more valuable than gold. Show him our clothes, how the fine weave and the even stitching. Show him a wristwatch. That would baffle him. Then pull this thing out and blow his mind. Okay? Take him out and show him the world. Stop and think about it. What would you show him in the modern world that would not absolutely baffle him? Even if you showed him something simple like lumber, he would be amazed at how cleanly it was cut, how evenly it was cut, how inexpensive it was, how rot resistant it was if you get treated lumber. Everything in here. Look at all the things in here. What is this stuff? It looks like wood, but it's not wood. You know, what is this fabric here? What are all these things? How does this work? How do you afford these big pieces of perfect glass? They wouldn't even think about this. He would be totally baffled. So here's the deal. I mentioned that a lot of the modern world starts after the Renaissance. It starts after 1776. But reality is it starts after World War II, most of it. And so what happened at World War II? Let me talk a little bit about that. Rosie the Riveter brought women to the table and elevated the status of women. Yeah. The Tuskegee Airmen and other servicemen and women who served with distinction brought African Americans to the table. Other minorities were represented. Some of you may be aware that in this picture is a Native American and a Czech American.
Yes.
Okay. And then the war was brought to a rather startling close by 3 Jews Leo Szilard, Albert Einstein, Robert Oppenheimer, and their contributions and the contribution of many other Jews who served with distinction brought the Jews to the table. Then after the war, a grateful nation sent many of these people to college, okay? And they were able to help use their education and use their initiative to help create this country, this marvel that we live in today. At the same time, the Marshall Plan rebuilt Europe, and that led to modern stability, okay? So what happened? Why was this so important? These countries were brought to the table. All these minorities who had been excluded before were brought to the table. Why is that so important? What does that do for us today? And this is where we need to use a computing metaphor. The first computers were serial computers. There were a series of processors, and information would flow up and down. And it was very slow, it was very ponderous. And this is what you had with the noble systems, with the society under the king. A vertical system where information went up and down. Most of the people were not interested in anything new, and they didn't understand the problem. It was a very slow, ponderous process. And so what happened? For 10,000 years, there was almost no progress. And all of a sudden, we go from a serial computer to a horizontal computer. That's what you have at the bottom, where people are taking different parts of the problems of humanity and of life, and they are solving their problems, okay? More people at the table solving problems, more solutions, okay? And this is why diversity is important. There are people who say, oh, diversity is some like crazy liberal kumbaya moment. No, it is not. There is a reason that the military doesn't care what color you are, what sex you are, what orientation you are, what religion you are. Can you do the job? We have work to do. And this is the reason that Silicon Valley and our universities and our hospitals don't care about those things either. There aren't enough people who can do those jobs. When you need people to do those jobs, you can't be picky. This is what happened. We brought women to the table. We brought Jews to the table. We brought African Americans to the table. All these people were able to contribute. There is this idea that progress is the accretion of information. Okay, so we have the scientific method. They do some experiments, and all of a sudden, the modern world appears. No, it's a sociological phenomenon. You empower people to think. You give them freedom. You give them education. You give them autonomy. You give them some free time to sit around and drink coffee or whatever, their books and stuff. And they come up with new ideas. That is the point of diversity. It is a point of competitiveness. It is a point of innovation. Okay? That brings up this interesting problem of the futurist. Okay? So you have a few thousand people around the world who call themselves futurists. And they look at what's going on in the world and they tell you what the future's going to look like. You know what the problem with that is? Facing them are hundreds of millions of innovators in every human discipline, and in human disciplines we haven't even heard of yet, who are doing everything they can to make sure that the future looks nothing like the present. And it's going to increase. Here's the essential thing to understand about innovation. It's unpredictable. There's a great irony here. We need science for innovation. We need science to test innovation. We need it to implement innovation. Science is absolutely powerless in predicting innovation. That's the whole point about innovation. If you could see it coming, it wouldn't have been innovative. We have no idea what the future will bring. And so we live in a period of great uncertainty. We don't know where we're going. Okay? How do you deal with a system of geniuses everywhere? People who are innovating all over the place. How do you compete? How do you survive? There are two strategies. We can do what this guy's doing. Okay, and what kings have done throughout history. Okay, he didn't want anybody questioning. He didn't want anybody innovating, because they're going to question him, and they're going to propose new solutions, not just about structures, but about how government should be run. And so this guy wants the technology. He wants the advances of the technology, but he wouldn't invest in it, and so you end up with this situation. These are the tanks you've probably been reading about them in Ukraine. The Russian tanks. You hit them with an explosion from overhead, they simply blow up. This problem has been known about by the Russians and the Americans for 40 years. Back in Afghanistan, the American observers found out this was true of Russian tanks, and the Russians knew it was true. And in 40 years, they never solved the problem. Then we're all happy that Ukraine is winning, but don't forget, every time one of those tanks does this, 3 sons husbands, fathers go up and are blown up for Putin's narcissism, because he needs to control the world. And so what we have to understand is that there are people who voted against the libraries because they were misinformed. They had misunderstandings about what was going on, and we're going to cover those in a second. But make no mistake about it. In every community in the world, there are people who will gladly trade everything for their power, their wealth, and their narcissism. Most of you recognize that. That's Lionel Barrymore in It's a Wonderful Life. He wants to control the whole town. And this guy will gladly turn the place into a pit. He will turn it into a dive of a town. He will turn it into a low rent place. Remember the 10 billionaires versus the 10 million millionaires? He wants to be the billionaire. And he doesn't care how bad things get. It's about him. And so one of the things that the narcissist cannot stand is the idea that some black child or some Latino child or some Asian child, and God forbid that it be a girl, will someday be smarter or wealthier or more successful or more powerful than he is. And before he will allow that to happen, he will burn it all down. He will turn us into a dead-end town. The only other way to deal with innovation, the only real way, a period where you have lots and lots of innovators, is to make sure you are innovating yourself. Okay? Now, one of the ways to do this is you go out and you attract high-tech firms. Okay? And this is important. A lot of communities do this, but a lot of communities think that is the only solution. That's the only way. You have to go find geniuses. Okay, you have to go somewhere else. And they come here and they'll design our businesses for us. And by the way, they'll design our community. And they'll design our priorities. And they'll tell us who we are. So here's my question to you. What the heck's wrong with our kids? Do our kids have less arms, legs, or nerve cells than kids in New York or Atlanta or Austin or Boston or San Francisco? Are our kids not as smart as those kids? Do they not have the same potential? What's so great about kids from those other cities? Why can't we do that? Why can't our children do that? So this is where we get to the libraries. Let me give you one example. What if we could get every parent to read to their children? What would happen to our schools? What would happen to our colleges and universities? What would happen to our workforce? What would happen to our economy? What would happen to our innovators and entrepreneurs? With all that money and education, what would happen to the arts and culture? Which would make this place better to live and attract even more money. On the other hand, what would happen to crime? What would happen to drugs? What would happen to reckless behavior and lethal things people do? What would happen to poor lifestyle choices? Everything we want would get better, and everything we don't want would increase. Think how simple a solution this is. Just get parents to read to their kids. And this is what I'm pushing very, very, very hard for. And that's where our libraries play a role. Let's look at our libraries. So there are 9 metropolitan statistical areas. You need to stay within the cities. One of the things I found in looking at the data is when you go to a rural parish, there's a certain price for a minimum library. You can't go below it. So the per capita numbers go wild. So you have to compare us to the other cities in the state. Lafayette is number 3. Let's start off with private donations to our libraries. Because of the Friends of the Library and the Foundation, Lafayette leads the state almost every year in private donations, 62,000. I found, look at this, Baton Rouge and New Orleans get no private donations. They don't even go out and look for them. We're trying to raise them. I found one year that Baton Rouge got $3 in private donations. I figured they fell out of a book and they said, what do we do with it? Put it in donations. It's $3. Okay, so the private sector, the nonprofit sector here is doing its job. Okay, let's look at our patrons. Okay, if you look at the lending of traditional materials, books, magazines, movies, and music, Lafayette leads the state per capita. Look at that, 6.6. Baton Rouge has 2 public universities, most of the state government, and the highest percentage of college graduates in the state. And look how much more our people read, how much more they check out traditional materials. So our patrons are doing their job, but wait a minute, forget the per capita. Look at the raw numbers. Materials loaned. We still beat Baton Rouge and New Orleans despite the fact that they are much larger than we are. So our patrons are doing their job. What about our librarians? Well, I can't find any metrics, but I will come back to some examples in a moment. But let me just say this. In the face of budget cuts and raids to the surpluses that they put away for specific progress, they have still managed to keep up with the best readers in the state. So I'm going to assume for the moment, I'll come back to it, that our librarians are doing their job. Everybody's doing their job, right? Hold my beer. Let's look at local funding. Baton Rouge leads the state at 11.1 mils. Okay? Number 2, Shreveport. Number 3, Monroe. Number 4 of 9, Alexandria. Number 5, Thibodaux. Number 6 of 9, Lake Charles. 7 of 9, if you're not laughing, ask someone who is. Number 7 of 9 is Hammond. And number 8 is New Orleans. Sweeping up behind the horses is Lafayette.
Wow.
Baton Rouge funds their libraries at 230% of what we fund our libraries at. We're here trying to help Lafayette and Acadiana compete with the world, and I'm looking at this list and asking, how are our kids going to compete with the rest of Louisiana? That's our investment. That's our commitment to our library. Let's go back, though. Let's look at 2018, back when the library was wasting money. Number 7. 1/100th of a mil ahead of Lake Charles, and not that far ahead of New Orleans. And yet we were told the library was wasting money.
But it's all on property tax.
Well, work with me a minute. Okay? Tax is the price we pay for civilization. If we want what we've got here, if we want roads, if we want a military, if we want police, if we want a future, we're going to have to pay for it. This is one of the things I don't understand. Not one of us, we've all been in business, and not one of us would provide a service or a good that we didn't expect a fair return on. And yet people expect government to provide good stuff, and we shouldn't pay for it. There shouldn't be a tax for that. Why not? Why aren't we responsible for what we use and for what we need? So we were near the bottom then, but despite that, we were able to build out this library system we have. Our librarians were able to squirrel away $40 million with some of the worst funding in the state to build new libraries, to expand libraries, to hire staff, to do it. And what was their reward? How many of you remember this? That car seat cost $10,000. The library is wasting your money. Really? This is a standard library table. It costs $1,600. You buy 8 chairs at $600 a pop. That is $6,000 for basic library furniture. It has to be durable. It takes a lot of wear. It takes a lot of use. $10,000 is not a lot of money. And you know what? You were never told about this. That bench seat was part of a complete furnishing package for a library. Okay? It was the one thing that librarians scrimped and saved for, to splurge, to get our kids excited about going to the library. It was the one little cool thing they got. And what nobody ever told us? That purchasing package came in under budget. And what were the librarians? Thanks for that. You're wasting our money. Buy one thing for our kids. One fun thing for our kids. And that gets attacked. And the fact that they kept the budget under budget is completely ignored. How many of you are angry that the library sponsored Drag Queen Storytime? Oh, somebody. The library didn't sponsor Drag Queen Storytime. They did. It was sponsored by private citizens. It's just like the KKK can march in the streets and the Nazis can rally in the park. People can use the library. But all you've ever heard is, oh, that's the library. The library brought that in. No, they didn't. That's why we voted against the millage. No, it's not. The millage took place 4 months before Drag Queen Storytime. But forget that. We're all business people in here. Who among you who has a problem at work says, shut down the business, slash the business. Don't take care of the problem, slash the whole business. Better yet, how many of you, when you have a problem at work, you go home and you beat your children? Because that's what we did. The people who hosted Drag Queen Storytime have not been affected in the least, but our children have. They have less to do with the libraries. They have a diminished future because something happened in the library, and rather than deal with the problem, we decided we were talked into, we were confused into slashing our libraries and slashing our children. That's who we punished. We didn't take care of the problem. We slashed our children. And we're still doing that. So, what should we do about it? We were told all these things about the library. The library is wasting money. The library has reserves they're not using. The library is buying things they don't need. The library is hosting drag queen story time. What should we do about that? What should we do about the people who said this? What should we do with these people? We should get them to read more books. Come on, work with me, folks. It's not that hard. Okay? This is actually a picture of Lionel Barrymore, and I think I have the only copy in existence. Okay, so there are people who say that we just can't afford those libraries. It just costs too much. It's too expensive. And if you think libraries and education are too expensive, I can tell you something you can afford. You can afford bankruptcy. Bankruptcy is cheap. Because if we don't start pulling our heads out of our sandboxes, we're not going anywhere. We have got to understand there are some things we pay for with government that are wasted, and there are some things that are investments, and they're canny investments. We are entering a period of great innovation. Winter is coming, and we aren't preparing for it. This is the budget for Lafayette Consolidated Government. If you go through the whole thing, look for how, in what way we as a community are preparing for the future, and you're going to find one item in there: our libraries. It's the only investment we're making in preparing our kids for the future. Mind you, that budget has $30 million for parks and recreation, extra money for parks and recreation, which I fully support. But what does it say that we've got money to train our kids to be athletes when none of them make money from it? And we are so short-sighted that we're not going to train our children to be thinkers and analyzers and innovators and entrepreneurs. That's the one item. We have to build that up. People don't want to pay for this. It is not a lot of money, and it doesn't matter. If we don't pay for it, we fail. It is that simple. We have got to compete in a rapidly changing environment. The innovation economy has never appeared before in humanity. For 10,000 years, the pharaoh and the monarch held us back. And only recently have we begun moving forward. It's going to accelerate. If we keep clinging to the ideas that we used in the past, we are not going to be prepared for a new economy. Okay? And so I will close with this address from 1862, Lincoln's address to Congress. The dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. The occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise with the occasion. As our case is new, so we must think anew and act anew. We must disenthrall ourselves, and then we shall save our country. And maybe we will save our little piece of Acadia. Thank you very much.